Good afternoon. Chapter 4, Lecture B. We'll get into slave cultures and slave resistance today. Becoming African American, the nearly 300,000 Africans brought to the mainland colonies were not one single person or group. They had a wide variety. It was a mixed group that spoke different languages, practiced different religions, and had many different customs. Slavery was not their bond, not their race. So slavery is what united them. A lot of them didn't even speak the same language or have even the same customs. And so the one unifying thing was their bondage. It took many years, but by the 19th century, they identified as African Americans and will create a unique culture here in the United States. Now, African American religion in colonial America, most wrenching is the transition from traditional religions to Christianity. No hard and fact distinction between the secular and spiritual words. Nature was suffused of spirits, and the dead could influence the living. Europeans deemed superstition or even witchcraft with traditional African religions that came from the mainland. When they did accept Christianity, they managed to merge some of their own practices or even kept some of their own gods in different contexts in what they would create. And that will become distinctly African American as well. They will have their own, and that's why they're more vocal. And you think of like even a Southern Baptist church today, like how it's different than other Baptist churches, is because they will put their own spin on Christianity once they accept it, and so forth. African American cultures, slave resistance and slave cultures and resistance too. In the Chesapeake area, because of the more healthful climate, the slave population began to reproduce by 1740. What that means is it was a good place for people to reproduce and have babies and have them survive. Exposed more to white culture, many soon learned English and swept up in the religious revival known as the Great Awakening from this period. Once rice plantations in South Carolina and Georgia seldom came in contact with whites. So what's going to be different between the Chesapeake area and then the further south, where tobacco farmers or more northern slaves are going to have contact with whites, Southerners are not, or more Southern, I should say, built African-style homes, African names, and spoke Gullah, mixed African roots. Low birth rate kept importation slave high in that region. The other reason why they're going to keep the slaves separate from those in the rice paddies or the rice fields is because of the potential risk of disease. In Charleston and Savannah, slaves worked more as skilled workers and servants and were assimilated more quickly. Sexual relations also happened, producing the first class of free mulattoes. Slaves in the North had more mobility and access to Main Street life, but fewer opportunities to create stable family life or a coercive or basically a cohesive community. And one thing on the mulattoes is they're still going to face struggles because they're going to be considered half-breed, mixed between the two. But you're going to see now a distinct culture that's going to start to emerge, and it's really going to carry over into the 1800s, and we get to the Civil War and all that stuff later on. Now, resistance to slavery, the common thread for all regional African cultures was the desire for freedom. That was something they all desired. Newspapers were filled, especially in the South, with runaway slaves. 18th century's first slave uprising was New York City in 1712, when a group of slaves set fire to houses on the outskirts of town, killed the first 9 whites to arrive on the scene. So this resistance to slavery is not going to be met very kindly. Continuous warfare with the Indians opened the door for slave resistance. Slaves seized the opportunity in the War of Jenkins' Ear, England versus Spain, and took a store containing numerous weapons at Stono, South Carolina. The Stono Rebellion, which comes later after that first incident I talked about, took the lives of more than 24 whites and as many as 200 slaves. Some managed to reach Florida and will have some freedom, but 1741, a panic similar to the Salem witch trials swept through New York City. Rumors spread of a planned rebellion and with white allies. 150 blacks and 20 whites were arrested. 34 alleged conspirators, including 4 whites, were executed. Disagreement over whether there was actually any plot. But going back to the Stono Rebellion and the incident beforehand, the New York City, they didn't want any repeat rebellion or people trying to revolt, and they're going to kill it, essentially, and they're going to put it at bay. Now, transitioning to empire freedom. So that was a little bit of the snippets of slave resistance, slave culture, and stuff going on. Now, the British patriotism, though slavery was a central part to the empire, Great Britain prided itself in being one of the world's most advanced and freest nations. Era's greatest naval power and commercial power, complex and powerful governmental system. At war with France most of the 18th century, no surprise to anyone, created the national bank and high taxes and a larger military. British were proud to be British, and even the colonists were proud to be part of this system, and they wanted to be the status of it. They didn't necessarily want to pay for it, but they wanted to be part of that status. The British Constitution believed power and liberty to the national antagonist. To mediate between both concepts was the rule of law. No one above the law. All law would be made by elected officials, etc. A balanced constitution. This notion of liberty sank deep in those who could not vote or hold office, extended to all areas of the British Empire, including colonial society. And the most important thing here, this British Constitution, is though the rights were limited in mainland England, those in the colonies who owned land and had these same notions of freedom are going to claim them. Whether the British actually recognize them, which they won't, the idea here is this notion of freedom is going to carry over the colonies and going to really reshape the colonies in the likeness of the English Isles themselves and Britain, but yet it's going to merge and create a whole unique new culture. The Empire of Freedom, too. Republican liberty. Republicanism, celebrated active participation in public life by economically independent citizens of the essence of liberty. Virtue was only possessed by property-owning citizens to help the public good. This group was made up of landed gentry. Most belonged to the country party, but the biggest impact was felt in the colonies. Now, liberal freedom. Liberalism, where Republican liberty had a quiet and social quantity, liberalism was essentially individual and private. John Locke was a leading philosopher. Social contract theory, you give up some rights, and all people had certain natural rights, though some were excluded. Both ideas of republicanism and liberalism reinforce each other. Security of property is a foundation of freedom, and both had a deep impact on the colonies. Essentially, these notions, though you might have two different concepts of it, virtue, the sense of property owning, the sense that all men have some rights, that social contract as well. These are going to really shape and create this culture of the colonies. That's going to shape the coming revolution and why it's so unique and dramatic. Okay, the public sphere 1. 18th century was far more tranquil than the 17th century in England. The right to vote varied to colony to colony, but property qualification was the same. And this is unique because a lot of people in the colonies owned land. Slaves, servants, tenants, adults, sons living at home, the power, and women lacked a will their own and could not vote. Voting percentage was much higher in the colonies. Between 50 and 80% of white men could vote, compared to less than 5% in Britain at the time. That's where, going back to that analogy, in comparison of those ideas of freedom in the colonies versus back in mainland England, because in the colonies a lot of people owned land. Voting was hardly democratic. Many will be excluded, though. I mean, it's not universal at this time. Political cultures, the public sphere 2. Between elections, members of assemblies remained out of touch with constituents because of the distances. Most high officials were appointed by London or the Crown. Most white men could meet the requirements to vote, but the requirements to hold office were much more complex, and usually to hold a higher office should be appointed by the Crown or Parliament. Most believe it should belong to the gentry to hold office and would take rum to the polling places. So, now, the funny thing about this is you get the poor all worked up, though they can't run for office. If you bring them free alcohol or free anything and get them riled up, they might either vote for you, be your greatest ally, or your worst enemy. But generally, if you brought rum, they would support you. This is illegal now. This is called, what is it called? When you go to polling stations, you can't go there and bribe people. Public sphere 3, politics and public. Political nation was dominated by the American gentry or their upper class. 18th century saw a considerable expansion of the public sphere, and governmental debate and questions were discussed more by informed citizenry, and you're going to see political thought expand across the classes a little bit. Clubs and groups formed, even brought into common citizens. The colonial press. The French and Spanish colonies in North America did not have a printing press. This rapidly changed in the British colonies. Political broadsides and pamphlets will come. First continuously published colonial newspaper, the Boston Newsletter, and the Pennsylvania Gazette, purchased by Benjamin Franklin in 1728. They're going to fill the colony with information, news, and political thought. The public sphere 4. You can see now where this is going. If you look at that, one of the big things of the American Revolution was the printing press and getting information out. This starts 40, 50 years prior, and you're going to get this ingrained in the colonists. Freedom of expression and its limits. Freedom of expression was not considered a right, especially in mainland England. Though freedom of speech originated in Britain in the 16th century, it was for legislators only in Parliament to speak their mind. However, this is going to morph and go over to the public area. Very few newspapers attacked the government, and after 1695, a British law expired. Newspapers no longer had to be censored by the government. They could print pretty much what they wanted, though there could be some consequences to it. Government bodies, though, tried to regulate the press. through means that they could. Now, the trial of Zinger. This is a good and important case that will establish really the principle of free press in the colonies. Financed by wealthy opponents of Governor William Cosby, published a hard attack on the governor on various issues. This governor was pretty awful. He was arrested and went to trial in 1735 because he attacked the governor. Andrew Hamilton, the father of Alexander Hamilton, charged if Zinger's charges against the governor could be proved, he should be acquitted. If not, then he was guilty of libel. Ironically enough, Zinger was found not guilty, thus ushering in that he was right on his claims. They weren't libel. He wasn't lying. He was telling the truth. This sent a powerful message throughout the whole colonies that you could print truthful information. Not a lie, but truthful information. This will be the basis for what of our freedom of press and freedom of speech and stuff will be founded upon later in the American Revolution. Now, last slide for today, the American Enlightenment. Influenced by the European Enlightenment, philosophers movement based on scientific method, research, and experiment. Facts. This crossed the Atlantic. Arminianism, reason alone, was capable of establishing the essentials of religion. Deism, belief that God essentially was true after creating the world, and religion was viewed as outdated. So what you're going to see in the Enlightenment in Europe, and it's going to make its way to the colonies, is religion is a little outdated, it's a little backwards, they can't explain everything, and so thereof, you're going to have reason alone was capable. If it's logical, scientific, it can explain everything. Deism, that God created everything, then pulled back, and science explains everything we deal with on a daily basis. And then religion was outdated. So now as we get into the Enlightenment, logic, reason, science are going to start to dominate conversation, and people are going to move away from old superstitions, old ways of thinking, and start re-examining the world. Okay, this concludes this lecture for today. I'll talk to you later.